Hi, I'm Lillian. Welcome back to my channel Ink and Pages. Today I'm going to be telling you about the 7 books I read this summer. I started off with 4 rereads and then 3 new to me books. So the first thing I reread was Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell. I kind of only chose to reread this to see if I would like it as much the second time around, and I didn't think I would, and I was unfortunately correct. So this is a graphic novel where we follow Freddie and her on again, off again girlfriend, Laura Dean. And unfortunately, I'm just not interested, nor do I think I ever really was, in like teenage relationship drama. And so unfortunately to me now, this just felt a lot like boring, terrible teenagers making a lot of boring and terrible decisions. Like I wasn't really interested in any of it. It felt very frustrating to follow Freddie around and ignore her friends who were nice to her and actually support her and want the best, and be manipulated by Laura Dean over and over again. And I get that that is the point of the book, but that is also the reason I wasn't having a very good time. So I can just say this isn't a bad book. I think it's fine, even though I really wasn't interested in the main crux of the matter. I'm still giving it 2 stars. Like, it was fine, it just really wasn't for me. Some parts did feel very realistic. I think it did quite a good job of portraying the misery that sometimes comes with being a teenager and feeling like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders while also not really being in control of many aspects of your life. And also shout out to one of Freddie's friends who's, I can't remember her name right now, but she was like actually kind of sympathetic and interesting, but she got maybe 5% of the plot's focus. And the art style in here is quite pretty. It's all black and white with a couple of pink elements, but really this was just a quick, unsatisfying read for me. And I think I probably felt the same way about a lot of these elements the first time I read this, but I was probably just distracted by the fact that it was a new book. And I think that often happens when you're watching a film for the first time or reading a book, and you're having a good time because it's new and because it's a story you haven't encountered before, and you're interested in it because it's novel. But then it's only upon reread or rewatch, if it's a film, that actually, now you know what's going on, you're kind of like, oh, actually, this isn't for me. And so unfortunately, that's how I felt about this. I'm giving it 2 stars. Like, it was still fine. It's just really not for me, and I'll be getting rid of it. The next book I reread was It's a Magical World, which is a Calvin Hobbes book by Bill Watterson. I love Calvin Hobbes. My family loved Calvin and Hobbes. We had a lot of the books which I read growing up, and so it's always really, really fun to reread them. And it was so fun. I think particularly this book, so much of my sense of humour comes from Calvin Hobbes, and so it's so fun to rediscover. And there are so many iconic moments and stories that I think about all the time, and I forget kind of what a big role Calvin Hobbes plays in my mind, in my inner life, because I'm constantly actually thinking about references from it and don't even realise. So in this book, there is a strip where Calvin's dad goes to the supermarket and he gets really overwhelmed by all the choices. I think particularly of like the peanut butter aisle, I remember. And when he gets back, Calvin's mum says to him, "Did the manager have to talk to you again?" And my family quote that line all the time. And I forgot that it was from this Calvin and Hobbes book. This was just a really, really fun and nostalgic blast from the past. Some of the stories in here are like quite philosophical, and it's, you know, this 6-year-old Calvin thinking about the bigger issues of the secrets of the universe and human behaviour, which makes sense because Calvin and Hobbes are named after a theologian and a philosopher respectively. But I actually kind of prefer the ones where they're just chaotic and crazy and creative, because they really feel true to the kind of games you would play as a child and the crazy antics you would get up to and the stories you would create together with your friends and the kind of adventures that you wanted to have as a small child. And so even when they get a bit ridiculous and you're reading them and questioning how much this is real and how much is happening in Calvin's imagination, probably quite a lot, those kinds of stories were the ones that I loved the most. So I had a really, really fun time with this, and I think I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. Next, I reread A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas because I was in a reading slump and I wanted to get out of it. And this book did just that. It's fast-paced, it's engaging, it's fun, it's a little bit silly. It's not great, but I had a fun time. And I quite like reading about angsty Feyre. She does a lot of moping in the first third half of this book, and I have fun reading that. So yeah, very, very quick reread. Haven't touched the rest of the series. Feel like I don't need to say more on this. I gave it 3 stars. And then the final book I reread before I actually got onto some new stories was When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nevo. This is part of a series that follows Cleric Chi in this, I think, China-inspired fantasy world. And Cleric Chi's job is to go around and collect folktales and local stories and histories from people. For this book, the story within the story that we, the reader, are discovering is about a local famous tiger character, except that Chi's audience within this book are also tigers who really don't like the story that they are telling, and they keep interrupting and making corrections and arguing about what actually happened. So there's a lot of back and forth within the story, and also this quite heightened tension because obviously these tigers are dangerous and there's this constant threat of what's going to happen at the end. Are they going to try and eat Chi? And I liked this just as much as the first book, The Empress of Salt and Fortune, and I've also given it 4 stars. And I'm really, really excited to continue my reread of this series. I've also got the 3rd book to reread, and then I have book 4 on my TBR shelf, and I think book 5 and possibly even 6 have also been published. Okay, so then I finally at last tackled the mainstay of my TBR shelf, Arcadia by Ian Pearce, which my sister got for me for a present, I think 10 years ago, and I finally read it. I'd kind of forgotten what this was meant to be about by the time I read it because I had owned it for so long, and actually I would probably recommend going into this without really reading the blurb. This starts in 1960s Oxford, but it is really a mix of science fiction and historical fiction and even a bit of fantasy in there. And we're following multiple different storylines and threads. And I just thought this was plotted so expertly. I loved how the different storylines were introduced one by one very purposefully, and then how they started to unravel and weave together. And I really, really loved that element. And I felt like I was really engaging with it and was really on the level for it because I could tell which characters, as they were introduced, would be important later on. And so I literally made notes for myself, like right from the very beginning, because I knew this was going to be a book I would have to have my brain switched on for. And I was right, it is quite complex and confusing, but because I had all my notes, I was okay. Until actually the very end, which I liked, but I don't quite understand how what happened at the end was able to happen. So that was a little confusing, but all it means is that at some point I will get to reread this and hopefully get even more out of it a second time. The writing of this book is quite simple, actually. It's very readable prose, and at points I even found myself thinking, oh, this is reading like it's a fable of some kind, which did work thematically with one of the story threads in here in particular. But it meant that for the characters, I never really got emotionally attached to them, really, apart from like maybe 1 or 2, but it was slow going. For the rest of them, I really didn't care if like bad things were happening to them or were threatened to them because I wasn't connected with them that much. It felt a bit like you were just reading about them for like academic interest, I guess. And the only thing I would say like I definitely didn't really like about this was there were 2 very, very minor, admittedly, kind of romantic threads within all of the different storylines. And one of them is like incredibly minor, kind of just hinted towards. But I didn't like how both of them were between teenage girls and older men. I thought that was weird, and especially weird that it happened twice. But other than that, this was a very fun time. I'm giving it 3.5 stars because I really liked it and I thought it was very, very strong. And I do hope that rereading it at some point in the future, I will like it even more and have an even better time. Like, this was 600 pages. It was a lot, and it's a good thing I kept notes. But yes, I'm very pleased to have finally read this, and I will definitely reread it in the future. The next book I read was also a present, but I didn't wait a decade before reading it. It was Here One Moment by Leanne Moriarty, which I got from my friend Ellie for my birthday this summer. This is a thriller about a group of passengers on an airplane who, during the flight, a woman stands up and she goes around to everyone there and makes a prediction about how and when each person there will die. So it's very, very intriguing at the beginning, and I think I went in with the wrong expectations. I was really expecting it to just turn into a murder mystery because I assume every like thriller or crime book in any way is going to turn out to be a murder mystery. And so I was really wondering what was going to happen and whether people were going to start dropping dead and their deaths were going to match the predictions, and was it going to be a conspiracy, was it going to be a serial killer, was she psychic, who knows. But really the bulk of this book is very psychological, and you're just following the passengers and the different ways they respond to receiving a prediction of their own death. So as well as following a handful of the passengers and their ensuing lives after this experience, we also get quite a lot of chapters from the perspective of the woman herself, the mysterious woman who made these predictions. And I will say at the start, these chapters felt very pointless to me. They felt just there to be ominous and intriguing, and you weren't really learning any new information. But I will say that later on, when these chapters actually became relevant and you learn all about this woman and her life story, that she turned out to be a really, really interesting and sympathetic character, and I was really, really invested in her. So even though a large portion, in my opinion, of the middle of this book did kind of feel like it was dragging, and maybe like 50, 100 pages, maybe, could have been taken out, the ending of this book, I think, really, really redeemed it for me. And it was like very much more emotional than I was expecting. And I actually did cry because of it. So I ended up being very pleasantly surprised by this. This was the first one of her books I've ever read, and I have given it 3 stars. And the final book I read this summer was Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. This is set in 1909 in our world, except that fairies are real and they're a very normal and accepted part of life, and everyone knows that they live in the wilderness, sometimes in your house, and they can cause problems for humans. And Emily Wilde is an academic who studies fairies, and in this story she goes to this fictional Scandinavian island to study their specific kinds of fairies. I really, really hoped that I would enjoy this book, and I really, really did. I especially liked and related to Emily's desire to just like get on with stuff. She wants to do her job, she wants to do it well, she just wants to get on with things, but she is constantly facing opposition from other people's conventions and misunderstandings and miscommunications, and I really understood that frustration. And I also really liked the side character of Wendell, who is Emily's colleague from Cambridge, who basically gatecrashes her trip. And he was a very silly combination of being very charismatic and charming and confident and mysterious, but also kind of pathetic and like whiny and useless and annoying and vain. And every time him and Emily were in a scene together, I was giggling, I was kicking my feet, I was loving it. And I also love the bits of the story where it was just Emily getting on with her job and like going around this new location and interacting and dealing with different kinds of fairies. For me, those were my favourite elements. The third act of this book, when things like really kick off, I didn't actually love as much, and I kept wishing it would go back to the sort of pootling around story that I felt like it was going to be at the start. Like it was fine, I just wasn't very interested in the events of the final act, and like I wasn't interested in the new like location that it went to, but I still had a very good time. I'm still giving this book 4 stars. I thought it was really, really excellent, and I cannot wait to continue reading the series now. So those are all the books I read this summer. I hope you also had a good time with all of your reading, and I'll see you in my next video.